Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name, as Joseph said, is Francine Balbina. I'm the Executive Director of DMS Offshore Investment Services in Brazil, so I'm based in Brazil. DMS was founded in 2000 by Tom Seymour. He's in the audience over there. He was actually responsible for creating the alternative investment divisions at the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, so he's a former regulator. And DMS is today the leader in fund governance services. We represent over 275 billion in assets under management for our client funds. We have 6 offices around the globe. The head office is in the Cayman Islands. We have Luxembourg, Ireland, here in New York, Hong Kong, and Brazil. We have now over 200 employees, and a little bit over 80 of those employees are just focusing on the governance side with independent directors, associate directors, and associates. And we just created, our recent addition to the team, we just created a FATCA unit within DMS. So we have now a FATCA team really researching the FATCA issues, aware of everything that's going on with FATCA, and we already started to provide the FATCA responsible officer services for our clients. So any of you in the audience that have a foreign financial institution, Cayman, BVI, that's gonna need FATCA services, just reach out to DMS.
Francine, please tell us about the key service providers for a Brazilian hedge fund, and how do they differ from those that service U.S. hedge funds?
Okay, I would just re-emphasize what Joca said. So in Brazil, the fund is not a company. It is a condominium, it's a pool of investors, so they don't have what you would have outside of Brazil as a board of directors. It's what we call an assembly of shareholders. So it is the shareholders actually owning the fund. So it's not really it's not a company at all. I think the biggest difference in terms of service providers, you have the investment manager, administrator, custodian, distributor, and auditor. But the biggest difference with service providers is on the administrator's role. So here in the US, you have the investment manager signing an administration agreement with the administrator, delegating the functions of NAV calculation or the RTA functions. In Brazil, the documents look like the administrator hired the manager, and the administrator is actually the one responsible for the fund. So they're responsible to hire all the service providers, including the auditors. They're responsible to also do the NAV calculations and all the auditors' role here. They're also responsible before CVM, which is the Brazilian SEC, and before the central bank. So they have a lot of liabilities in terms of their role in the fund industry. They have to be registered with the CVM, all the service providers have to be, and they also have to be a financial institution. So what ends up happens in Brazil is that most of the administrators are banks. Then, there being banks, they end up doing the custody and the distribution as well. So in Brazil, the whole discussion about what you have in the US of the segregation of duty, where you have a custodian, then you have a distributor, then you have an administrator, it's not very relevant just because the way the industry is structured. You usually have the administrator doing all these functions, and they're very regulated, so there's a lot of things they need to comply with. And the industry works really well in that model, but I think that's very different. Well, it is very different from a US perspective. And there is not many administrator choices in Brazil either. I can think of 5 big ones, and then maybe a couple of smaller ones. They're growing, so there's not a lot of options. Also, like in the US, have tons, and even in Europe, like you have a lot of global administrators. There's very few local administrators in Brazil because they have so much liability. Another thing to mention, the auditors, we have a rotation. So every 5 years, if you're a regulated fund, you need to rotate the auditor. And again, the administrator needs to do that. And then I think it's every 5 years. And then after the first rotation, the previous auditor can come back for 3 more years if the manager decides they like the interaction.
We don't like that.
And then another thing to mention is the prime broker. It took me a while to learn that in the United States, because for a multimercado, which is our equivalent to hedge funds, we don't usually use prime brokers, because the security lending systems in Brazil is operated by the Bovespa, the stock exchange. So they centralize that operation, and then they act as the counterparty, and they hold a default risk as well. And it's all electronically done. So we don't really, it's all centralized by the Bovespa and what we call the BTC, which you're able to go electronically, and lenders and borrowers are able to check the options, and the risk is controlled by a central party. So we don't really use a prime broker for a multimercado. So that's different. So I think that's the main differences in terms of service